The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the Golden Spoon, a bustling diner in downtown San Francisco. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as regular customers chatted over their meals. Among the waitstaff was Rita Chen, a hardworking single mother who had been serving at the diner for the past 3 years to support her daughter's college dreams. That particular Wednesday seemed like any other until Rita noticed an unusual buzz among her coworkers. The restaurant owner, Mr. Thompson, was unusually present on the floor, straightening tablecloths and scrutinizing every detail. Whispers circulated that an important political figure might be visiting, though no one knew exactly who. "Make sure everything is perfect," Mr. Thompson barked at his staff, his face flushed with nervous energy. "We can't afford any mistakes today." Rita continued her work diligently, serving her regular customers with her characteristic warm smile. She had learned long ago that treating every guest with equal respect was the key to success in this business. As she cleared a table near the entrance, she overheard Mr. Thompson speaking to another waitress. "I heard she's coming here for lunch," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "That woman thinks she can just walk in anywhere and expect special treatment. Well, I've got news for her, she's just another customer here." Rita felt uncomfortable hearing her boss speak so dismissively about someone he hadn't even met yet. She busied herself with wiping down tables, trying to ignore the growing tension in the air. The lunch rush was about to begin, and she needed to focus on her work. Around 1 p.m., a small group of people entered the diner. Among them was Vice President Kamala Harris, dressed in a simple navy blue suit, her presence both commanding and approachable. Rita noticed how the vice president smiled warmly at everyone, including the busboy who nearly dropped his tray in surprise. Mr. Thompson's reaction was immediate and visible. His face tightened, and he muttered under his breath, "Great, here comes the circus." He gestured to one of the newer waitresses to handle the vice president's table, deliberately avoiding assigning his more experienced staff. The young waitress, visibly nervous, approached the table with shaking hands. Rita watched from nearby, feeling a mix of concern and sympathy for her coworker. The situation grew tense when Mr. Thompson approached the table, his customer service smile barely masking his prejudice. "Welcome to the Golden Spoon," he said, his tone notably different from his usual greeting. "I hope you're not expecting any special treatment here. We serve everyone equally." His emphasis on equally carried an unmistakable edge. The restaurant fell silent, the regular customers sensing the hostility in his words. Rita felt her heart racing, knowing this moment could either explode into an ugly scene or become something entirely different. She watched as Vice President Harris looked up from her menu, her expression calm and composed despite the clear disrespect she had just received. The next few moments would change everything in the Golden Spoon, but not in the way anyone expected. The tension in the air was palpable as customers and staff alike held their breath, waiting to see how this uncomfortable situation would unfold. Rita couldn't help but feel that she was about to witness something extraordinary, though she had no idea just how significant this moment would become. As the afternoon sun continued to paint shadows across the diner's worn tiles, the scene was set for an encounter that would soon become a powerful lesson in dignity, leadership, and the unexpected ways in which respect can transform even the most challenging situations. The customers who had chosen to have lunch at the Golden Spoon that day had no idea they were about to witness a masterclass in handling prejudice with grace and wisdom. Vice President Harris set her menu down slowly, her eyes meeting Mr. Thompson's with an unwavering gaze. The diner remained hushed, the only sounds coming from the gentle hum of the ceiling fans and the distant sizzle of the grill. Instead of responding to his hostile remarks, she did something unexpected. She smiled. "You know," she began, her voice warm and measured, "my mother used to tell me about a small diner much like this one, where she worked while putting herself through school. She always said that restaurants are where you find America's real stories, where hardworking people come together, share meals, and build community." Rita, who had been pretending to clean nearby tables, felt her chest tighten with emotion. The vice president's words struck a chord, reminding her of her own journey and struggles. She noticed how several other staff members had also paused their work, drawn in by the unexpected turn of events. The young waitress standing at the table, still nervous but now intrigued, clutched her notepad closer. Mr. Thompson's face showed confusion. This wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. His prepared hostility seemed to deflate in the face of such genuine warmth. "I'd love to hear about this diner's story," the vice president continued, gesturing to the worn but well-maintained interior. "How long have you owned it, Mr. Thompson? It must take tremendous dedication to keep a business running, especially through recent challenges." Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, caught off guard by her sincere interest. 23 years, he managed to reply, his earlier bravado diminishing. "Started it with my wife back in '98. "That's remarkable," Vice President Harris responded, genuine appreciation in her voice. "Small businesses like yours are the backbone of our communities. I'd love to hear more about how you've adapted over the years." As Mr. Thompson began to speak, almost despite himself, the atmosphere in the diner began to shift. The tension that had filled the air moments before started to dissolve, replaced by something more complex and meaningful. Customers who had been watching the scene unfold with apprehension now leaned in, interested in hearing the story of their local diner. Rita watched as the vice president engaged not just with Mr. Thompson, but with everyone around her. She asked the young waitress about her dreams and aspirations, listened intently to an elderly customer's stories about the neighborhood's history, and showed genuine interest in every person who spoke up. The conversation naturally turned to the challenges facing small business owners and working families. Mr. Thompson, now speaking more freely, shared his struggles during the pandemic, the sleepless nights worrying about keeping his staff employed, and his fears for the future. "That's exactly why I'm here," Vice President Harris explained, her voice carrying across the now attentive diner. "Not for special treatment, but to listen and understand the real challenges facing American businesses and workers. Every story in this room matters." Rita noticed tears in the eyes of Mrs. Lee, a regular customer who had run her own dry cleaning business for decades. The vice president's words had touched something deep and true, the shared experiences and struggles that united them all, regardless of their differences. As the afternoon wore on, the Golden Spoon transformed from a place of tension to one of unexpected connection. Mr. Thompson's initial hostility had completely melted away, replaced by a thoughtful expression as he engaged in genuine dialogue about small business policies and community support. The young waitress, who had been trembling with nervousness earlier, was now confidently sharing her experiences as a first-generation college student working to pay for her education. Vice President Harris listened intently, offering encouragement and sharing her own stories of perseverance. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in the other customers and staff. People from different tables had begun to join in the conversation, sharing their own stories and experiences. The diner had become an impromptu town hall, but one filled with genuine connection rather than political posturing. As the vice president prepared to leave, she took time to thank every staff member personally. When she reached Rita, she squeezed her hand warmly. "Thank you for everything you do here," she said. "It's people like you who make these places so special." Mr. Thompson approached the vice president just before she reached the door. His face had softened, the harsh lines of prejudice replaced by something approaching shame and respect. "Madam Vice President," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I let my preconceptions. I was wrong." Vice President Harris touched his arm gently. "We all have moments when we let our biases cloud our judgment," she replied. "What matters is how we choose to move forward. This diner is a special place, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for creating a space where people can come together." After she left, the Golden Spoon buzzed with excited conversation. The afternoon had become something none of them had expected, a lesson in how grace and dignity could transform conflict into connection. Rita noticed Mr. Thompson standing quietly by the counter, deep in thought. The next morning, Rita arrived at work to find something had changed. Mr. Thompson had posted a new sign in the window, "All are welcome here, come share your story." It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the lasting impact of that extraordinary afternoon. The story of what happened at the Golden Spoon spread throughout the community, then across social media, and eventually made its way into national news. But for those who were there, it wasn't just about a vice president handling disrespect with grace, it was about how one person's choice to respond to hostility with understanding could transform not just a moment, but an entire community. The weeks following Vice President Harris's visit to the Golden Spoon brought unexpected changes that nobody could have predicted. The story had touched something in people's hearts, spreading first through local news channels and then gaining traction on social media. Amateur videos captured by customers had gone viral, showing the powerful moment when hostility transformed into understanding. Rita noticed the changes immediately. The diner was busier than ever, but it wasn't just about increased business. There was something different about the atmosphere, a warmth that went beyond the usual friendly service. People weren't just coming for the food anymore, they were coming to be part of something bigger. Mr. Thompson's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. The man who had once greeted an important guest with thinly veiled hostility now went out of his way to make every customer feel special. He started a weekly, community table night, where people from different walks of life could share meals and stories together. "You know," he confided to Rita one quiet afternoon, "I've owned this place for over 2 decades, but I never really understood what it could be until that day. I was so caught up in my own prejudices that I couldn't see the bigger picture." The young waitress who had served the vice president's table, now more confident in her role, had become something of a local celebrity. Local news stations interviewed her about the experience, and she used the platform to speak about the importance of education and breaking down barriers. Her story resonated with other young people working their way through college. One morning, a surprise arrived at the diner, a handwritten note from Vice President Harris herself. The letter spoke about the power of small moments to create big changes and thanked the staff for being part of an important conversation about unity and understanding. Mr. Thompson framed the letter and hung it on the wall, right next to the "All are welcome here" sign. The Golden Spoon began hosting monthly Bridge Builder events, where people from different backgrounds could come together over coffee and conversation. Politicians from both sides of the aisle started dropping by, not for photo ops, but to genuinely engage with constituents in this unexpectedly neutral ground. Rita watched as her regular customers became more than just faces she served coffee to, they became part of a growing community. Mrs. Lee, the dry cleaner owner, started mentoring young entrepreneurs who gathered at the diner. A retired teacher began offering free tutoring sessions at one of the corner booths. The diner had transformed into a hub of community connection. The impact spread beyond the diner's walls. Other local businesses began adopting similar inclusive practices. The city council took notice, launching a Common Ground initiative inspired by what had happened at the Golden Spoon. Small business owners from across the city started meeting regularly to discuss how they could make their establishments more welcoming to all. One day, a group of journalism students from the local university came to document the diner's story. They interviewed Rita, who found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. Before that day, she told them, "I think we all operated in our own little bubbles. We served people, sure, but we didn't really see them. Now, every person who walks through that door has a story we want to hear." The students were particularly interested in how the diner handled difficult conversations about race, politics, and social issues. Mr. Thompson's response surprised everyone: "We don't avoid these conversations anymore. We just make sure they happen with respect and understanding." That's what we learned that day: you can disagree with someone and still treat them with dignity. The story caught the attention of a major news network, which featured the Golden Spoon in a special report about bridging divides in America. The segment showed how one moment of grace had sparked a movement of understanding that continued to grow. Regular customers began sharing their own stories of transformation. A businessman admitted how the diner had changed his perspective on social issues. A local politician spoke about learning to listen more and judge less. Even the kitchen staff noticed how the changed atmosphere had affected their work environment, making it more collaborative and supportive. 6 months after the vice president's visit, the Golden Spoon hosted a special anniversary event. The small diner was packed with people from all walks of life, laborers and executives, students and retirees, people of every background imaginable. They came together not just to commemorate what had happened, but to celebrate what their community had become. During the event, Mr. Thompson stood up to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "When I opened this diner, I thought I was just running a business. Now I understand that we're really in the business of building bridges. Every cup of coffee, every conversation, every moment of connection matters." Rita, watching from her usual spot near the counter, felt proud to be part of this transformation. She thought about all the young people who now saw the Golden Spoon as proof that change was possible, that prejudice could be overcome with patience and understanding. The diner's story began appearing in textbooks and training materials as an example of how small actions could lead to significant social change. Business schools used it as a case study in community engagement and ethical leadership. But for those who worked there, it remained simply their daily reality, a place where barriers came down over cups of coffee and shared meals. As the anniversary celebration wound down, Rita overheard a conversation between two customers that summed up everything that had changed. One was a regular who had been there the day of the vice president's visit, the other a first-time visitor. "You know what makes this place special?" the regular asked. "It's not just about the food or the service. It's about how everyone who comes through that door gets a chance to be heard, to be part of something bigger than themselves." The first-time visitor nodded, looking around at the diverse crowd. "I can feel it," they replied. "It's like everyone here has a story, and somehow, they're all connected." Rita smiled to herself, thinking about how one afternoon had set in motion changes that continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. The Golden Spoon had become more than just a diner, it was a testament to the power of choosing understanding over hatred, connection over division, and hope over fear. 1 year after the memorable visit, the Golden Spoon's story had evolved far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What started as a tense encounter in a small San Francisco diner had sparked a nationwide conversation about understanding and reconciliation. But for Rita and the regular staff, it was just another busy morning serving breakfast when something unexpected happened. A producer from a major streaming service walked in, ordered a cup of coffee, and sat at the counter. She'd been hearing about the Golden Spoon for months and had finally decided to see it for herself. As she watched the natural interactions between customers from all walks of life, she realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. "This isn't just a local story anymore," she told Mr. Thompson later that morning. "This is something the whole country needs to see." Initially, Mr. Thompson was hesitant about the attention. "We're just a diner," he said, looking around at his busy establishment. "We serve food and try to be decent to each other. That's all." But Rita and the other staff saw it differently. They had witnessed countless moments of connection and change over the past year. There was the time a heated political argument between two customers transformed into a thoughtful discussion over pie. Or the morning when a homeless man was invited to share breakfast with a tech executive, leading to a job opportunity and a changed life. The streaming service wanted to create a documentary series, not about the vice president's visit, but about what had happened afterward, the real stories of everyday people finding common ground over cups of coffee and plates of pancakes. As word of the documentary spread, something remarkable began happening across the country. Other small businesses started reaching out, sharing their own stories of transformation. A barbershop in Atlanta had become a place for community dialogue. A bookstore in Chicago had started hosting unity dinners. A cafe in rural Texas had transformed into a space where farmers and climate activists found common ground. The Golden Spoon became the unofficial headquarters of what the media dubbed the Common Ground movement. Mr. Thompson, once so resistant to change, now found himself speaking at business conferences about the power of inclusive spaces and authentic community building. Rita's role evolved too. While she continued serving tables, "It's where the real stories happen," she would say, she also began mentoring other service industry workers who wanted to create similar environments in their own establishments. Her simple wisdom about treating every customer with dignity regardless of their status had become a cornerstone of the movement. The documentary team captured moments that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. They filmed as a group of police officers and community activists shared a meal and honest conversation about reform. They recorded as former political rivals worked together to organize a neighborhood cleanup. They documented the tears and hugs as prejudices melted away over shared stories and warm food. One particularly powerful moment came when the young waitress who had served Vice President Harris graduated from college. The entire diner community had supported her journey, with customers contributing to a scholarship fund and fellow staff members covering her shifts during finals. The ceremony was held in the diner itself, with customers and staff cheering as she received her diploma. The documentary also highlighted the challenges. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some longtime customers stopped coming, uncomfortable with the diner's new atmosphere of open dialogue. There were occasional tense moments when discussions became heated. But what made the Golden Spoon special was how these challenges were handled, with patience, respect, and an unwavering commitment to understanding. As filming progressed, more national figures began visiting the diner. Politicians from both parties, celebrities, and social activists all came to experience the phenomenon for themselves. But Mr. Thompson maintained strict rules: no publicity stunts, no campaign speeches, just genuine conversation and connection. The diner's influence reached education circles as well. Universities began studying what they called the Golden Spoon model of community building. Business schools incorporated its principles into their ethics courses. Social workers and community organizers came to learn how to replicate its success in other settings. One day, a group of international visitors arrived, community leaders from conflict zones around the world. They had heard about the diner's transformation and wanted to understand how simple acts of hospitality could bridge deep divides. Rita spent hours sharing stories with them, explaining how small moments of connection could lead to lasting change. The documentary team captured a particularly moving scene when a former white supremacist, who had been gradually changed by his experiences at the diner, publicly apologized to the communities he had once hated. The moment wasn't staged or planned. It emerged naturally from the environment of trust and understanding that had been cultivated. As the documentary neared completion, the producer asked Rita what she thought was the real secret of the Golden Spoon's success. Rita thought for a moment before responding. "You know, people often think it's about the big moments, the vice president's visit, the public transformations, the media attention. But it's really about the small stuff. It's about remembering Mrs. Wu likes her tea extra hot, or that Mr. Johnson needs help reading the menu because he forgot his glasses. It's about treating everyone who walks through that door like they matter, because they do." The documentary captured how the staff handled difficult situations with grace. When a customer made an insensitive comment, instead of confrontation, they would engage in gentle education. When someone was having a bad day, they received extra attention and care. The film showed how these small acts of kindness created a ripple effect that extended far beyond the diner's walls. During the final days of filming, something unexpected happened. A group of regular customers, inspired by their experiences at the Golden Spoon, decided to start a foundation. Its mission was to help other small businesses transform into spaces of community healing and connection. Mr. Thompson was moved to tears when they announced it would be named the Golden Spoon Initiative. The documentary's premiere was held at the diner itself, with screens set up inside and in the parking lot to accommodate the crowd. As people watched their own stories unfold on screen, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The film captured not just the big moments of change, but the countless small interactions that had made it all possible. In the final scene, the camera panned across the diner during a typical morning rush. It showed people from all walks of life sharing meals and conversations, solving problems together, and creating connections that would have seemed impossible just a year before. The golden spoon had become more than just a symbol of change, it was a blueprint for how communities could heal and grow stronger together. 2 years after Vice President Harris's transformative visit, the golden spoon prepared for its biggest moment yet. The documentary had not only premiered to critical acclaim but had sparked a genuine social movement. Now, the diner was hosting a national conference on community building, with representatives from all 50 states gathered to learn from its example. The morning of the conference, Rita arrived early, as she had done every day for the past 5 years. As she turned on the lights and started the coffee makers, she remembered the nervous young waitress she'd been when she first started. Now, she was helping train other establishments across the country in what people were calling the Golden Spoon Way. Mr. Thompson stood in the middle of his transformed diner, taking in the scene. The walls were covered with photographs documenting the journey, the famous visit, the community gatherings, the graduation ceremonies, and countless moments of connection between unlikely friends. But his favorite photo was the simplest, a candid shot of 2 former rivals sharing a laugh over coffee. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just been kind that day," he mused to Rita as they prepared for the conference. "But then I realize, maybe we needed that moment of confrontation to truly understand the power of change." The conference brought together an extraordinary mix of people. There was a diner owner from rural Montana who had turned his establishment into a place where ranchers and environmentalists found common ground. A cafe owner from Miami had created a space where different immigrant communities bridged cultural divides. A restaurant in Detroit had become a catalyst for neighborhood renewal. But what made the conference truly special were the everyday stories. A teenager spoke about how the Golden Spoon had inspired her to start a lunch club at her high school, bringing together students from different cliques. A retired police officer shared how regular conversations at his local diner had changed his perspective on community policing. During the morning session, the young waitress who had served Vice President Harris, now a successful business consultant, led a workshop on creating inclusive spaces. She spoke about how that nervous moment had transformed not just the diner, but her own life's trajectory. "Fear and prejudice thrive in silence," she explained to the attentive audience. "But they can't survive in places where people truly talk to each other, where they share their stories and their humanity." The conference also addressed the challenges. Not every attempt to replicate the Golden Spoon's success had worked. Some communities weren't ready for change. Others struggled with resistance from those who preferred division to unity. But even these failures provided valuable lessons about patience, persistence, and meeting people where they were. During the lunch break, something unexpected happened. Vice President Harris made a surprise virtual appearance, speaking to the gathered crowd about the ripple effects of that memorable day. What happened at the Golden Spoon wasn't just about one moment of tension transformed into understanding, she said. It was about recognizing that every interaction is an opportunity to build bridges or walls. You've all chosen to build bridges, and that choice is changing our nation, one conversation at a time. The afternoon sessions focused on practical applications. Business owners shared strategies for creating welcoming spaces. Community leaders discussed how to handle difficult conversations. Social workers explored how to use shared meals as a tool for reconciliation. Rita led a session on the power of simple kindness. She shared how remembering customer preferences, showing genuine interest in their lives, and creating a sense of belonging had helped transform the Golden Spoon from a simple diner into a community cornerstone. It's not about grand gestures, she explained. It's about consistent small acts of kindness that add up over time. It's about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through your door. As the day progressed, participants broke into small groups, sharing meals together just as they would in their own establishments. The diner buzzed with conversation in different languages, accents, and dialects, all united by the common goal of building stronger communities. Mr. Thompson's closing speech captured the essence of what the Golden Spoon had become. 2 years ago, I was a man full of prejudice, thinking I knew everything about running a business. Today, I'm still learning, still growing, still being amazed by the power of human connection. This isn't just about running a successful business, it's about creating spaces where healing can happen. The conference concluded with a ceremony honoring the Golden Spoon champions, individuals and businesses who had made extraordinary contributions to their communities. The recipients ranged from small-town cafe owners to urban community organizers, each with their own story of transformation. But perhaps the most powerful moment came after the formal proceedings ended. As participants lingered over coffee and dessert, spontaneous connections formed. A conservative rancher and a liberal activist exchanged phone numbers, planning to collaborate on a community project. A group of young entrepreneurs brainstormed ideas for social impact businesses. The next morning, as Rita prepared for her regular shift, she found Mr. Thompson sitting quietly at the counter, looking through messages from conference participants. People were already implementing what they'd learned, sharing stories of small victories and everyday transformations. "You know what makes me proudest?" he said, looking up from his phone. "It's not the awards or the recognition. It's knowing that somewhere right now, someone is walking into a diner or a cafe feeling unwelcome, and they're going to find acceptance instead of rejection, all because of what we learned here." The Golden Spoon had become more than just a success story, it was a blueprint for hope in a divided world. The documentary was being shown in schools and community centers. The Golden Spoon initiative had spread to thousands of businesses across the country. But most importantly, it had proven that change was possible, one conversation at a time. As the morning regulars began to arrive, Rita watched the familiar scene unfold, the businessman sharing a table with the construction worker, the elderly couple mentoring young students, the former rivals and now planning community projects together. The tension and prejudice of that famous day had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. The story of the Golden Spoon continued to evolve, but its core message remained the same: when people come together with open hearts and minds, even the smallest space can become a catalyst for profound change. It wasn't just about serving food anymore, it was about nourishing the human spirit and proving that, even in the most divided times, connection and understanding were still possible.